3 years earlier, my adoptive parents were arrested for human trafficking, and the police finally tracked down my biological family. However, tragedy struck before they could bring me home. They were involved in a car accident on their way to pick me up. My parents and younger sister were killed instantly. Only my older brother, Derrick, survived because he had been working overtime that night. Not long after the accident, he was diagnosed with ALS. When we finally met, hatred filled his eyes. If it were not for you, our family would still be together. From that moment, I carried the weight of 3 deaths on my shoulders. I also took responsibility for the debt left behind by the accident, along with the rest of Derrick's life. I dropped out of school and worked 4 jobs at the same time. When I felt hungry, I survived on cheap bread. When I became sick, I endured it and kept going. Every dollar I earned went toward Derrick's medication. For 3 years, that was my life. Until one day, while delivering food to a private club, I saw the person who was supposed to be bedridden at home, waiting for me to turn him over in bed. Derrick. He stood beside a billiards table with a cue in his hand. His movements were smooth, precise, and completely free. No trace of illness could be seen. He struck the cue ball cleanly. One of his friends laughed and said, "Derrick, you have been faking ALS for 3 years. Even if this was a test, do you not think it has gone on long enough?" Derrick lined up another shot without looking up. Harriet was raised by traffickers for 10 years. No one knows what she learned from them. How could we bring her back into the Lawson family without testing her first? Besides, Sheila was terrified that we would abandon her once we found our real family. She cried about it more than once. We needed to give her time to adjust. A flicker of discomfort crossed his friend's face. However, Harriet has worked herself to the bone to pay for your treatment. Another ball dropped into a pocket. Derrick smiled, pleased with himself. Sheila and my parents are flying back tomorrow. Once they arrive, I will arrange for Harriet to return to the Lawson family. After that, I will make it up to her. I lowered my head as a burning sensation rose inside my nose. A mechanical voice suddenly echoed in my mind. "Congratulations, host. The obsession commission has been completed. Would you like to claim your reward?" I wiped away the blood that trickled from my nose. "Yes," I replied quietly. "Claim it." In 3 days, I would finally be going home. The Lawson family had never been the home I wanted. By the time I finished my work for the day and returned to the apartment I rented, it was already past midnight. "So, you finally decided to come home? Where have you been this late?" As usual, Derrick Lawson greeted me with a scowl the moment he saw me. He sat in his wheelchair with limp arms and weak legs. He looked nothing like the man who had been clearing the pool table with ease earlier that day. In the past, the moment I stepped inside would revolve around Derrick. No matter when he called for me or what he needed, would respond right away. This time, I ignored his question. I sat down, pulled out a loaf of bread, and started eating. Derrick froze for a second before his face darkened. "Are you deaf? I am talking to you." After swallowing my mouthful, I finally spoke. "Derrick, I am starving. I do not even have the energy to talk. This is my dinner. Can you let me finish eating first?" His expression stiffened. For a moment, he seemed unsure how to respond. After I finished the bread and regained a little strength, I opened my bag and took out several boxes of medicine. I popped out the pills and placed them in Derrick's hand. "I bought this month's medication. Go ahead and take it." His throat bobbed. He avoided my eyes and said, "Just leave it there. I will take it later. Go wash up first, you are covered in dust." "It is disgusting." I nodded and walked toward the bathroom. However, instead of washing up right away, I left the door slightly open. Through the crack, I watched Derrick wrap the pills in a tissue and toss them into the trash can. Listening to the sound of running water from the sink, I quietly closed the door. I stared at my pale reflection in the mirror and stood there in silence. Earlier that day, after I collapsed, a stranger had called an ambulance and sent me to the hospital. The first thing I heard after waking up was the doctor letting out a regretful sigh. "If you had started treatment earlier, there might have been a chance, but..." He never finished the sentence. He did not need to. The truth had already settled in. I did not have much time left because I had given my chance at survival to Derrick, only to learn that the sacrifice had been for nothing. He had never needed it at all. When I finally stepped out of the bathroom, Derrick already sounded impatient. "What is taking so long? I am going to bed." After saying that, he waited for me to help him onto the bed. I could not understand it. The person who had supposedly died was coming back tomorrow. The test I had been put through was finally ending, so I did not know why he continued to pretend. I felt exhausted and only wanted to collapse into bed and sleep. However, the face in front of me looked far too much like the one burned into my memory. I could not bring myself to be heartless. I helped Derrick to his feet and eased him onto the bed. Just as I turned to leave, he suddenly grabbed my wrist. For once, his voice softened. "Harriet, since you have taken care of me for 3 years, I decided not to blame you anymore for the car accident." My movements paused. I turned slightly to look at him. There was no trace of guilt in his eyes. Instead, there was a kind of satisfaction, as if he were inspecting a finished assignment and approving the results. A sharp pain pierced my chest. I knew at once that it did not belong to me. It belonged to the original Harriet, a lingering emotion she had left behind. I pushed the feeling down and looked straight at Derrick. Derrick, if I were the one who got sick, would you fight for my life the way I fought for yours? He froze. For the first time, he did not have an answer. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. I turned and walked out of the room. At 4 in the morning, I got up quietly and prepared to leave for work. As I passed by, I heard my brother talking on the phone. His voice sounded softer than I had ever heard before. Do not worry, you are the one I love most. No one could ever replace you. Mom and Dad love you the most too. They would not have spent the last 3 years traveling overseas with you if they cared about meeting her. Even if she walks through the doors of the Lawson family tomorrow, she will still come after you. Happy now? There was a brief pause. When Derrick spoke again, there was a hint of pleading in his voice. It is only 8 at night where you are, but it is 4 in the morning here. I am getting old. I cannot stay up like this anymore. I really need to sleep. The stabbing pain returned to my chest. I rubbed the spot and looked toward Derrick's bedroom door. No matter how much he looked like him, Derrick was not him. Today was my last day of work. Even if I was leaving, I wanted to finish everything properly. After completing all my handovers and officially quitting all 4 of my jobs, I suddenly realized I had nowhere to go. Ever since I arrived in this world, I had not had a single moment to rest. First, my adoptive parents treated me like an object. Being beaten and cursed was part of everyday life. Every day was spent figuring out how to survive. I felt terrified that I would die before I could complete my mission. 6 months later, my adoptive parents were arrested. Just when I finally reconnected with my biological family, I ended up carrying the burden of 3 lives on my shoulders. From that moment, every second of every day was spent working to earn money. As I wandered through downtown, I spotted a familiar figure. Derrick stood at a jewelry counter, holding up his phone with the camera pointed at a display case. On the screen was the face of a girl around my age. She pointed at different pieces of jewelry through the video call. That one is not pretty. It looks too old-fashioned. I do not like that one either. Seriously, bro, what happened to your taste? Did living in the slums for 3 years ruin your sense of style? Not a trace of anger appeared on Derrick's face. He patiently asked the sales associate to bring out more pieces for her to choose from. Only after the girl finally smiled did he relax. The ruby one is nice, she said. It is just a little small. However, let us be clear. This only counts as a welcome home gift. You disappeared for 3 years and you still owe me an apology gift for that. Derrick agreed without hesitation. Deal. Just tell me what you want and I will get it for you. As he spoke, he handed over his card and paid. The sales associate carefully packaged the jewelry and passed the bag to him. Sir, here is your ruby necklace and the complimentary bracelet. Please make sure you take everything with you. Before Derrick could leave the jewelry store, I had already turned and walked away. I glanced at the balance on my phone. Less than $800. Since I could not take anything from this world with me, I figured I might as well treat myself during the little time I had left. I stopped by a pharmacy and bought some painkillers. After the medicine eased the stabbing ache in my chest, I headed to the food court. Everything I had always wanted to eat but never dared to buy, I finally tried. I also bought new clothes and a new pair of shoes. Just after changing into them, my phone buzzed. A message from Derrick. There was only one sentence and a location pin. The address belonged to one of the most expensive villa communities in the city. Even though I had spent days preparing myself, my emotions still felt complicated when I finally stood in front of someone who was supposed to be dead. Harriet, you are here. Mom grabbed my hand and pulled me onto the couch as if she had truly been looking forward to seeing me. It is good to have you home. You suffered a lot these past few years. Dad looked me over from head to toe. His expression revealed nothing. Now that you are back, you need to learn how things are done in this family. Do not embarrass the Lawson family. Sheila Lawson wore a sweet smile. Welcome home, sis. None of them offered any explanation for faking their deaths. They acted as if it were something so small that it did not deserve a single word. At that moment, Derrick came downstairs. Dressed in a casual suit, he walked toward me with an easy, relaxed stride. I had assumed he would feel at least a little guilty. Instead, the first thing he said was, Harriet, the last 3 years were a test created by every member of this family. Congratulations. You passed. He stopped in front of me and smiled. Starting today, you are officially a member of the Lawson family. I stood there, frozen. For a moment, I did not know how to react. What I could not understand was how Derrick could brush aside 3 years of lies without changing his expression. Maybe my silence lasted too long. Derrick chuckled. What? So happy you cannot even speak. I pressed my lips together. No. The smile on his face faded for a brief second. He pulled out a bank card and handed it to me. There is $3 million in this account. It is more than 10 times what you earned over the last 3 years. Think of it as compensation. The pain, humiliation, and suffering I endured for 3 years suddenly felt like nothing more than a business transaction, a project that had reached its conclusion. The inspection was complete, the results were approved, and then it was time for payment and settlement. I stared at the card in silence but did not take it. Derrick frowned. What, is it not enough? I looked away from the card and met his eyes. I cannot use this money. Nothing in this world could be taken with me when I left. The original Harriet had already died from her adoptive parents' abuse before I ever entered this world. The only thing she left behind was her desperate wish to return home. This compensation meant nothing. At that moment, Sheila leaned against Mom's shoulder and spoke with complete sincerity. Take it, sis. You are a Lawson now. There will be plenty of times when you need money in the future. She glanced at my clothes. And honestly, what you are wearing looks pretty cheap. You should buy a few decent outfits so people do not laugh at the Lawson family. Mom agreed right away. Sheila is right. A Lawson daughter should be like Sheila. Excellent in academics, cultured in the arts, and skilled in social situations. I already arranged etiquette classes, public speaking lessons, French courses, and piano lessons for you. I heard you never finished high school, so you will need a lot of tutoring as well. I do not want people saying that a Lawson daughter is poorly mannered and poorly educated. The painkillers were probably wearing off. Something swelled inside my chest, pressing against my lungs until breathing became difficult. You do not need to. I interrupted Mom. I will be leaving soon anyway. The room fell silent. A flash of joy crossed Sheila's eyes, but her voice trembled as she spoke. Sis, are you angry with me? You have every right to be. I took your place and made you suffer all these years. Please do not leave. If you go, Mom, Dad, and Derrick will all be heartbroken. If anyone should leave, it should be me. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Mom pulled Sheila into her arms. My precious girl, nobody is making you leave. Dad looked just as distressed. He hurried to wipe away Sheila's tears. The Lawson family is your home. It always will be. Even Derrick joined in comforting her. Do not cry. Your eyes will get swollen and that will not look pretty. When he turned to me, every trace of warmth disappeared. You will stay in the guest room from now on. Last room at the end of the hall upstairs. Do not get lost. As I passed Sheila's bedroom, I paused. A blurry memory surfaced in my mind. Mom and Dad were working late, and Derrick sat on the bed with little Harriet in his arms, reading her a picture book. Every now and then, the two of them burst into laughter together. Then I blinked, and the image vanished. The room that once belonged to little Harriet had long since become someone else's. The moment I entered the guest room, I took more painkillers. That night, I slept badly. In my dreams, I was 5 years old one moment and 10 years old the next. Laughter mixed with crying. The sounds tangled together until I could not tell them apart. Before dawn the next morning, a wave of pain jolted me awake. Warm liquid filled my nose. I clamped a hand over it and rushed into the bathroom. A long time later, I finally stepped out, my face pale as paper. Without even getting water, I chewed and swallowed 2 painkillers. During breakfast, Derrick suddenly spoke. There is a gathering today. It will mostly be young people. Harriet, you are coming with us. A flicker of displeasure crossed Sheila's face, disappearing so quickly that it might have been my imagination. She smiled. Of course. It will be a great chance to introduce some friends to my sister. She looked me over. Your clothes are not suitable. Why do you not borrow some of mine? When I came downstairs wearing clothes that clearly did not fit me, Sheila's smile grew brighter. You look great. Then she added, it is just a little plain. As she spoke, she fastened a bracelet around my wrist. I knew this bracelet would look perfect on you. Derrick glanced at it and nodded. It does suit you. My gaze drifted to the ruby necklace around Sheila's neck. Compared to that, the complimentary bracelet on my wrist felt almost laughable. When we arrived at the hotel, one of Derrick's friends called him away. Sheila immediately volunteered to stay with me. The second Derrick disappeared, several of Sheila's friends surrounded me. One of them looked me up and down before smirking. So, you are the sister everyone keeps talking about? I heard you were raised by human traffickers. She tilted her head mockingly. Did you pick up any tricks from them? Maybe become an expert at kidnapping people yourself? I had less than 2 days left in this world. My body felt more exhausted with every passing hour, and I did not have the energy to talk. However, even though I refused to respond, the girls only became more enthusiastic under Sheila's smug smile. At first, Derrick glanced in our direction every now and then. After seeing Sheila laughing and chatting happily, he stopped paying attention. Sheila leaned close to my ear and whispered, her voice filled with triumph. So what if you are the biological daughter? As long as I am unhappy, you will not even make it through the front door of the Lawson family. I looked straight at her and spoke slowly and clearly. I just want some peace and quiet. Can you make them leave me alone, Janet? The moment she heard the name Janet, Sheila's pupils tightened. Panic flashed across her face. She forced herself to stay calm, then quickly found an excuse and led her friends away. I wiped the blood from my nose and stayed in the restroom for what felt like hours. By the time I finally moved, the party was over and everyone had gone home. No one remembered me. A janitor eventually found me slumped there and gently asked whether I needed an ambulance. I shook my head. No. By the time I returned to the Lawson family estate, it was completely dark outside. The moment I stepped through the front door, an ashtray flew toward me. I cried out and stumbled backward, clutching my forehead. Blood streamed down the side of my face. Derrick's voice sounded terrifyingly cold. Where were you? Where is Sheila? Why did you not answer any of our calls? Mom rushed over with red-rimmed eyes and slapped me across the face. It must have been you who drove Sheila away. Her voice trembled with anger. A girl raised by human traffickers is exactly what I expected. We should never have let you come back. I stared at her. Then, through the blood blurring my vision, I looked toward Derrick. At that moment, the system's countdown echoed in my mind. The stabbing pain in my chest intensified without warning. It hurt so much that every word required all the strength I had left. If this was how things were going to be. I struggled for breath. Then she would have been better off dying at 5 years old. At least she would not have spent all those years wanting to come home. Believing someone was waiting for her. No one noticed the flaw in my words. No one paid attention at all. They were too busy calling people and searching for Sheila. Dad slammed his hand against the table. Derrick. Lock her in the storage room and let her think about what she has done. Until Sheila comes back, she is not coming out. Without a word, Derrick grabbed me with one hand, dragged me away, and threw me into the storage room. The door locked from the outside. The world became silent. The wound on my forehead would not stop bleeding, and blood kept dripping from my nose. In the darkness, I wiped it away again and again until I no longer had the strength to lift my hand. I did not know how much time had passed when the system's voice finally sounded again. Reward delivered. A faint smile touched my lips. Finally. I could go home. Someone was waiting for me there. Meanwhile, Derrick found Sheila in an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city. Her evening gown was torn, the ruby necklace was gone, and she looked miserable and disheveled. The moment she saw him, she threw herself into his arms and burst into tears. Brother. You finally came. I thought I would never see you again. Derrick wrapped his arms around her. His voice shook uncontrollably. It is okay. I am here now. You are safe. Do not be afraid. Only after her sobs quieted did he ask, why did you come here? Why were you not with your sister? As though the question triggered a terrible memory, Sheila shuddered. Fresh tears filled her eyes. It was Harriet. She said she was going to sell me. I got scared. I was about to call Mom and Dad when I suddenly blacked out. When I woke up, I was already here. My phone was gone too. The entire drive home, Derrick's face stayed dark. He made a phone call. Cancel everything we ordered before. The house, the car, and the school admission spot. Get rid of all of it. And Harriet's birthday banquet. Cancel that too. As soon as the car entered the Lawson family estate, Derrick got out before it even reached the garage. He walked straight toward the storage room. Harriet. You had better get out here right now. The moment he unlocked the door and pulled it open, his voice died in his throat. He froze in place, completely still. The storage room was dark. The hallway light poured in from behind Derrick, illuminating a large stain of dark red across the floor. It stretched from the doorway where he stood all the way to the corner of the room. I was slumped against the wall with my head tilted slightly to one side. A dried wound cut across my temple. The area around it had swollen into a massive purple bruise, so swollen that one of my eyes was nearly unrecognizable. Blood from my nose had run past my lips and chin, smearing across my cheeks and ears. The front of my shirt had long since lost its original color. It was soaked through with blood. The pool beneath me had spread to Derrick's shoes, sticky and dark. Harriet? Derrick's voice trembled. He called my name again. Harriet? Mom had been celebrating Sheila's safe return. When she saw Derrick storm toward the storage room, she followed him. The sight before her made her scream. She covered her mouth and staggered back a step. Dad had been comforting the frightened Sheila. After hearing the commotion, he rushed over as well. The moment he saw me, all the color drained from his face. Peeking out from behind him, Sheila leaned forward. She had just finished crying in front of Mom and Dad. Her eyes were still red as she spoke in a soft voice. What is wrong with Harriet? She stared at the blood on the floor. That blood is not fake, is it? A moment later, she let out a small laugh. After all, Derrick pretended to have ALS for 3 years. Maybe Harriet resents us and decided to fake fainting with some stage blood to scare everyone. She grew up with human traffickers. She is probably an expert at lying. Shut up. Derrick's roar cut her off instantly. Sheila flinched so hard her whole body shrank back. Tears spilled from her eyes. Mom stepped in front of her. How can you talk to your sister like that? She glared at Derrick. She is terrified too. Instead of comforting her, you are yelling at her? Derrick did not answer. He bent down and lifted me into his arms. As he carried me toward the door, he barked out orders. Get the car ready. We are going to the hospital. Call ahead and tell them to prepare for an emergency patient. The car sped toward the hospital. The entire way there, Derrick refused to let go of me. His palms were drenched with cold sweat. As he held me, memories from the last 3 years flashed through his mind one after another. When we first met, he had made things difficult for me on purpose because he wanted to test me. Sometimes he intentionally knocked over his bowl of food, then used it as an excuse to yell at me. Again and again, he reminded me that I was responsible for the deaths of our parents and sister. Each accusation forced me to lower my head and work even harder caring for him. Back then, he had only planned for the test to last 1 month. 1 month was enough. Enough to see whether hardship had changed my character. 1 month later, Sheila called him. She cried so hard she could barely speak. So now that you have her, you do not need me anymore? I guess blood wins in the end. You had not seen her for 10 years, but after spending 1 month together, you trust her completely. Her voice broke into sobs. I am only the adopted daughter. Of course I will never compare to the real one. The scent of antiseptic was the first thing that pierced Derrick's senses. It was a cold, sharp odor that clung to the back of his throat, reminding him of every hospital room he had ever visited, except this time, there was no wheelchair, no carefully rehearsed tremor in his hands, and no lingering sense of superior control. He was running. His leather shoes clicked loudly against the polished linoleum floor of the emergency wing, a frantic, irregular rhythm that mirrored the hammering in his chest. In his arms, Harriet felt lighter than a bundle of dry firewood. Her head fell back against his elbow, her dark hair clotted with blood from the gash on her temple. It was cold. Her skin possessed a clammy, translucent quality that made her veins look like thin, blue threads spun just beneath the surface. Get a gurney. Now. Derrick roared as he burst through the double doors of the emergency room. A triage nurse immediately looked up, her professional calm shattering for a fraction of a second before she sprang into action. Over here. Lay her down. 2 orderlies rushed forward with a metal gurney. When Derrick placed Harriet onto the thin mattress, his hands came away stained a deep, sticky crimson. The front of his gray designer suit was ruined, soaked through with her blood, but he barely noticed. His fingers were shaking, not with the artificial palsy of his faked ALS, but with a raw, primal terror that made his joints feel like water. What happened? The emergency physician asked, shining a penlight into Harriet's eyes. She fell. No, she was locked in a room, Derrick stammered, his usual eloquence deserting him. She has a head wound. And her nose, she's been bleeding. From her nose. She's unconscious. The doctor's face darkened as he lifted Harriet's eyelids. Pupils are dilated. And sluggish. There's severe facial trauma. Get her into trauma room 2. Starden. 4. Type and cross for 4 units of O negative, and get a portable CT scan in. Here immediately. The gurney was wheeled away with terrifying speed. Derrick tried to follow, but a firm hand pressed against his chest. Sir, you need to stay here, the nurse said, her voice a mix of authority and quiet pity. We need to work. Are you a relative? I'm her brother, Derrick said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Her brother. The brother who had spent 3 years pretending his legs didn't work. So she would drag herself to the bone to pay for his non-existent medicine. Behind him, the glass doors of the emergency entrance slid open again. His parents, Richard and Evelyn Lawson, hurried into the lobby. Richard was supporting a pale, trembling Sheila, whose eyes were wide with a carefully calibrated mixture of fear and confusion. Derrick. Evelyn gasped, rushing to her son's side. She grabbed his arm, her eyes darting to the blood on his clothes. Oh my God, is she going to be all right? What did the doctor say? Derrick looked at his mother. This was the woman who, less than an hour ago, had slapped Harriet across the face, calling her a disgrace and blaming her for Sheila's disappearance. Her manicured hand was now trembling against his sleeve. But Derrick felt a sudden, sickening wave of detachment. They don't know, Derrick said, his voice flat. She's in trauma. It's all my fault, Sheila whimpered, burying her face in Richard's shoulder. If I hadn't gone to that place, if I hadn't gotten lost, Harriet wouldn't have been locked in the storage room. Derrick, please tell me she'll be okay. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Richard sighed, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and irritation. Sheila. Stop blaming yourself. Harriet is the one who took you there. Her behavior has been erratic ever since she returned. Locked room or not, she shouldn't have had This kind of reaction. She probably had a pre-existing condition she didn't tell us about. A pre-existing condition? Derrick repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. He looked at his father, seeing the cold, analytical man who had agreed that a 3-year test was a perfectly reasonable way to evaluate a lost daughter. Richard, she's covered in bruises. Her face is swollen. And the blood, there was so much blood. That didn't come from a fall. Before Richard could answer, the doors to trauma room 2 opened, and the emergency physician stepped out. His expression was grim, the kind of look doctors only wore when the news was entirely devoid of hope. Are you the family of Harriet Lawson? The doctor asked, pulling off his latex gloves. Yes, Richard said, stepping forward with his usual commanding air. I am Richard Lawson. What is the status of my daughter? The doctor looked at Richard, then at Evelyn, and finally at Derrick. The silence in the corridor grew heavy, suffocating. She is currently on mechanical ventilation, the doctor said flatly. Her heart stopped shortly after she arrived in the trauma bay. We were able to establish return of spontaneous circulation after 8 minutes of CPR, but her situation is extremely critical. Evelyn gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Her heart stopped. But, she's only 20 years old. How is that possible? That is what we are trying to determine, the doctor replied, his tone chillingly professional. The CT scan revealed a massive subdural hematoma, likely caused by a severe blow to the head. But more concerning are the systemic findings. Her blood work shows profound, chronic anemia, severe malnutrition, and advanced liver and kidney failure. The doctor paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at the wealthy, impeccably dressed family standing before him. Based on the level of organ damage, she has been suffering from a severe, untreated chronic illness for at least a year. There are also signs of extensive, long-term physical neglect. Her body is entirely depleted. To be frank, I am astonished she was even walking, let alone working. Did none of you notice her symptoms? The corridor fell into a dead, horrifying silence. Derrick felt the ground beneath his feet tilt. A chronic illness. For at least a year. Severe malnutrition. He remembered the dry, cheap loaf of bread Harriet had been eating the night before. He remembered how her hands had trembled when she handed him his medication. He remembered the pale, ghost-like reflection he had seen in the bathroom mirror through the crack in the door. Derrick, I am starving. I do not even have the energy to talk. He had dismissed it. He had thought she was being dramatic, or perhaps a bit sullen because she had been forced to work late. There must be some mistake, Evelyn stammered, her face turning white. We just brought her home yesterday. We didn't know. She was living on her own. Before this. She was living on her own because she was working 4 jobs to pay for my treatment, Derrick whispered, his voice cracking. He looked at his mother, his eyes wide and bloodshot. To pay for the medicine I threw in the trash every night. Sheila took a half step back, her breath catching in her throat. Richard's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, his mind racing to calculate the legal and social fallout of this revelation. I need to ask you some difficult questions, the doctor continued, his gaze locking on to Derrick. We found several empty blister packs of high-dose painkillers in her bag. They are heavily restricted medications, usually prescribed for terminal oncology patients. Do you know where she obtained them? Or why she was taking them? Derrick shook his head slowly. I don't know. She just brought me my pills. I never asked what she was taking. There is one more thing, the doctor said, his voice dropping to a quiet, solemn register. During the neurological assessment, we detected 0 pupillary response. Her electroencephalogram, the EEG we ran to check her brain activity, is completely flat. There are no signs of cortical function. What does that mean? Evelyn asked, her voice rising in panic. What do you mean flat? It means, the doctor said gently, that Harriet is brain dead. The body is being kept alive by the ventilator, but the person you knew is gone. The emergency room lobby was empty save for the Lawson family. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the hospital's HVAC system and the occasional beep of a monitor from the inner wards. Richard sat on a plastic chair, his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. Evelyn was weeping silently, her shoulders shaking as she clung to a wet tissue. Sheila sat a few feet away, her eyes darting between her adoptive parents and the hallway where Derrick had disappeared. She felt a cold, creeping sense of dread. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. Harriet was supposed to be the greedy, uncultured imposter who would eventually be driven out of the house. by their collective coldness, leaving Sheila as the undisputed princess of the Lawson family. She wasn't supposed to die. And she certainly wasn't supposed to turn out to be a terminally ill martyr. "Mom," Sheila whispered, reaching out to touch Evelyn's arm. "I'm sure the doctors are wrong. There are always miracles, right? Harriet is strong. She survived the traffickers, she can survive this." "Don't," a voice rasped from the dark corridor. Sheila froze. Derrick walked out of the shadows. He had changed into a pair of hospital scrubs. The staff had given him, but his face looked older, hollowed out by a sudden, crushing weight. In his hand, he held a small, plastic bag containing Harriet's personal effects, a cheap canvas wallet, a key ring with a plastic cat keychain, and her phone. "Derrick, I was just trying to." "I said, don't," Derrick repeated. His voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a cold, vibrating intensity that made Sheila instantly draw her hand back. He didn't look at her. Instead, he walked over to the trash can in the corner of the lobby. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was the receipt from the pharmacy he had found in the pocket of Harriet's discarded clothes. Tramadol. Gabapentin. Severe pain management. The date on the receipt was from yesterday afternoon, just hours before she came to the Lawson villa. Derrick sat down on the floor, ignoring the chairs, and turned on Harriet's phone. It didn't have a passcode. The screen lit up, revealing a generic wallpaper of a cloudy sky. The call log was almost entirely empty, save for 2 numbers, his own, labeled Derrick, and a contact labeled Work 1, Delivery. There were no friends. No social media apps. Only a notes app with a single entry titled To Do. Derrick tapped it. His fingers were shaking so violently he almost dropped the device. 1. Pay rent for the apartment, due on the 5th, $450. 2. Pick up Derrick's Rilazole, need to ask Dr. Chen for a discount on the bulk order, $1,200. 3. Transfer $800 to the accident debt collector. 4. Buy bread. 5. Don't fall asleep on the scooter. There was a final line, written in a different font, dated 2 days ago. The system says the commission is almost complete. Just a little longer. I can go home soon. The system. Derrick murmured, his brow furrowing. He remembered her words from the storage room. If this was how things were going to be, then she would have been better off dying at 5 years old. At least she would not have spent all those years wanting to come home. He closed the Notes app and opened the browser. The search history was short, consisting of only a few terms searched over the past 6 months. How long can a person work with liver failure? Does ALS pain get worse in winter? How to make cheap bread taste better? What does a family do together on holidays? A tear slipped from Derrick's eye, landing on the cold glass of the screen. He had spent 3 years lying in a bed, watching her run herself ragged. He had watched her hands grow chapped and bleeding from the winter cold. He had watched her skip meals, claiming she wasn't hungry or that she had eaten at work. And all the while, he had felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. Look at how obedient she is, he had thought. Look at how much she is willing to suffer to atone for the accident that killed our family. But there had been no accident. Their parents weren't dead. Their younger sister hadn't died in a car crash on the way to pick Harriet up. It had all been a lie, a massive, elaborate theatrical production designed to test her character, to see if 10 years with human traffickers had turned her into a monster. And they had let her carry the weight of those imaginary deaths for 3 years. "Richard," Derrick said, his voice barely a whisper. His father looked up, his face pale and drawn. "Yes, Derrick? Why did we do it?" Richard swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the floor. We wanted to be sure. The traffickers who took her were notorious. The police report said she was raised in an environment of theft, deceit, and violence. We couldn't just bring her into our lives without knowing who she really was. We had a duty to protect our family. To protect Sheila. To protect Sheila, Derrick repeated. He let out a dry, rattling laugh that sounded like a death rattle. Sheila, who wasn't even born when Harriet was taken. Sheila, who has lived in luxury while Harriet was being beaten and starved. Derrick, that's unfair. Evelyn cried, her voice cracking. We loved Harriet. We wanted to find her. But when we finally did, she was so cold. She didn't cry when she saw us. She didn't smile. She looked at us like we were strangers. Because we were strangers. Derrick shouted, his voice finally breaking, echoing through the empty lobby. She was 5 years old when she was stolen. She didn't remember your faces. She only remembered a dream of a home where people loved her. And when she finally found us, we handed her a debt, a fake tragedy, and a paralyzed brother, and told her to earn her right to be loved. He stood up, his body trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. He walked over to Richard, leaning down until his face was inches from his father's. You faked your deaths, Richard. You spent 3 years traveling the world with Sheila, living in 5-star hotels, while Harriet was selling her own blood to pay for my medicine. Do you know what she did when she had no money? She went to the clinic and sold her plasma. I found the track marks on her arms. Yesterday. I thought she was a drug addict. I actually thought she was using. Evelyn let out a loud, horrified sob, burying her face in her hands. Richard looked away, unable to meet his son's eyes. And you, Derrick turned his gaze to Sheila, who shrank back into her chair. You knew. You knew the whole time. You were the one who suggested the test. Lasted longer. You were the one who called me, crying, saying you felt threatened by her. I was scared, Derrick. Sheila sobbed, her tears flowing freely now. I thought you would abandon me. I'm just an adopted daughter. I didn't want to lose my family. You didn't have a family to lose, Sheila, Derrick said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. Because after today, you don't have a brother. And they don't have a son. The rental apartment was located in a dilapidated tenement building on the edge of the city's industrial district. The stairwell smelled of damp concrete and cheap cooking oil, the walls covered in peeling paint and scribbled graffiti. Derrick climbed the stairs slowly. His legs felt heavy, as if the fake paralysis he had acted out for 3 years had finally become a physical reality. He reached the 3rd floor and stopped in front of room 302. The door was a thin sheet of plywood with a cheap brass lock. Derrick took out the key ring he had taken from the hospital and inserted the key. It turned with a dry, metallic click. He pushed the door open. The apartment was tiny, no larger than the walk-in closet in his bedroom at the Lawson Villa. There was a single window that looked out onto a brick wall, letting in only a gray, filtered light. The furniture consisted of a single cot with a thin, faded mattress, a folding plastic table, and a single wooden chair. In the corner, a small hot plate sat next to a metal pot. This was where Harriet had lived for 3 years. Derrick walked inside, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. The air was cold and still, carrying the faint scent of old paper and cheap bread. On the plastic table sat a small, cardboard box. Derrick walked over and opened it. Inside were several neat stacks of paper. On top was a stack of medical receipts. Derrick picked them up and began to read. July 14th, liver biopsy. Diagnosis, advanced hepatic cirrhosis, non-alcoholic. Secondary to severe, chronic toxin exposure during childhood. Recommendation: immediate hospitalization and liver transplant evaluation. Patient response: declined treatment due to financial constraints. November 22nd. Emergency department visit. Diagnosis: esophageal varices with active bleeding. Head trauma secondary to syncope, fainting. Patient response: discharged against medical advice after stabilization. Derrick's hands shook so badly the papers slipped from his fingers, scattering across the dusty floor. Toxin exposure during childhood. He remembered the police reports from when the traffickers were arrested. They had run an illegal chemical recycling workshop in the basement of their house. Harriet had been forced to work there, sorting plastic and copper wire without any protective gear, breathing in toxic fumes for 10 years. Her illness wasn't a sudden tragedy. It was a slow poison that had been ticking inside her body since she was a child. And instead of receiving the medical care she desperately needed, she had spent her remaining strength buying expensive, brand-name medication for his faked ALS. Derrick fell to his knees, his hands searching the floor for the scattered papers. As he gathered them, his fingers brushed against a small, leather-bound notebook hidden at the bottom of the box. He pulled it out. The cover was worn, the corners frayed. He opened the first page. The handwriting was neat, but small, as if the writer was trying to save as much space as possible. June 12th. Today, the police told me they found my family. They said my brother, Derrick, is the only survivor. He is very sick. He has ALS. The doctor says it is a terrible disease that slowly paralyzes you until you cannot breathe. The police said the car accident happened because they were rushing to see me. It is my fault. If I hadn't been lost, they wouldn't have died. Derrick wouldn't be alone. I must take care of him. I must pay for his medicine. This is my duty. August 3rd, Derrick yelled at me today. He threw his soup on the floor. He said. I was dirty and that I smelled like the trafficker's basement. He is right. I am dirty. I will wash my clothes more often. I must work harder so he doesn't have to worry about anything. October 19th. My head hurts today. I threw up blood in the bathroom at the restaurant. The manager saw and told me to go home, but I cannot lose this job. The medicine cost went up this month. I need $200 more. I will skip lunch for the next 2 weeks. Bread is cheap. It will be fine. December 25th. It is Christmas. I saw a family in the park. The mother was holding her daughter's hand, and the father was carrying a giant teddy bear. They looked so happy. I wonder if my mom and dad would have held my hand like that if they were still here. Derrick was very angry today because I didn't buy the brand of soup he wanted. I wanted to tell him Happy Christmas, but I was afraid he would throw it away. I will try harder next year. Derrick pulled the notebook to his chest, his body racking with silent, violent sobs. He curled up on the cold, dusty floor of the tiny apartment, surrounded by the evidence of his own monstrous cruelty. He had thought he was a genius. He had thought he was a protective older brother, using his intelligence to unmask a potential threat to his family. But he had only succeeded in torturing a dying girl who had loved him with every broken, bleeding piece of her soul. The luxury sedan pulled up to the curb outside the hospital. Richard Lawson stepped out, his face set in a hard, defensive mask. He had spent the last 2 hours on the phone with his lawyers and public relations team, trying to draft a statement that would minimize the damage if the story of Harriet's condition got out. Evelyn followed him, her eyes red and swollen, her hand clutching a handkerchief. Sheila walked behind them, her head bowed, her expression a picture of fragile sorrow. But inside, her mind was spinning. Why did she call me Janet? The question had been repeating in her head like a broken record ever since the hotel party. Harriet had looked at her with those cold, dead eyes and spoken. That name. Janet. It was a name Sheila hadn't heard in 10 years. A name she had buried deep in the mud of her past, hoping it would rot and be forgotten. Richard, a voice called out from the lobby. 2 men in dark suits stepped forward. They weren't doctors. They were police officers, specifically, detectives from the Special Crimes Division, the same unit that had investigated the human trafficking ring 3 years ago. Detective Harris, Richard said, his tone instantly shifting to one of polite authority. What are you doing here? If this is about my daughter's accident. It's not an accident, Mr. Lawson, Detective Harris said, his face expressionless. We received a call from the hospital staff regarding a potential case of severe abuse and medical neglect. Furthermore, we need to speak with your adoptive daughter, Sheila. Sheila's heart skipped a beat. She tried to hide behind Evelyn, but Harris's gaze locked onto her with a cold, piercing intensity. Why do you need to speak with Sheila? Evelyn asked, her voice defensive. She's the victim here. Harriet kidnapped her. We've already run a preliminary investigation into the kidnapping report. Harris interrupted, pulling out a small tablet. We recovered the security footage from the hotel and the surrounding streets. Your daughter Sheila was never kidnapped. She walked out of the hotel of her own free will, met with a young man in an alley, and handed him her ruby necklace. She then took a taxi to the abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city. Richard's eyes widened. He turned to look at Sheila, his voice dropping. Sheila, is this true? No. It's a lie. Sheila cried, her voice rising in panic. The traffickers, they must have forced me. Or maybe Harriet hired someone to do it. She wanted to frame me. We also arrested the young man, Harris continued, ignoring her outburst. His name is Leo. He's a known associate of the local gang that operates in the industrial district. He confessed that Sheila paid him to help her fake the kidnapping to frame Harriet. Evelyn stumbled back, looking at Sheila as if she were a stranger. Sheila, why? Why would you do such a thing? Because she isn't Sheila, a voice said from the entrance. Everyone turned. Derrick stood in the doorway, his clothes disheveled, his eyes hollow. In his hand, he held a thick manila folder he had retrieved from the archives of the police station using his family's connections. Derrick, Richard said, his voice shaking. What are you talking about? Derrick walked over to Harris and handed him the folder. 3 years ago, when the police raided the traffickers' compound, they found 2 girls. One was Harriet, who had been there for 10 years. The other was a girl named Janet, the biological daughter of the primary trafficker, who had been trained to assist in the operation. The silence in the lobby became absolute. During the confusion of the raid, Derrick continued, his eyes locked onto Sheila's pale, frozen face, the real Harriet was severely traumatized and unable to speak. The trafficker's daughter, Janet, took Harriet's identification documents and claimed to be an orphan who had been kidnapped a year prior. She was placed in an orphanage, where our family eventually adopted her under the name Sheila. No, that's not true. Sheila screamed, her face contorting into a mask of pure terror. Mom. Dad. Don't listen to him. I'm your daughter. I love you. The DNA test we did 3 years ago when we found Harriet, Derrick said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. We compared Harriet's DNA to ours, and it was a match. But we never tested Sheila because we assumed she was just an orphan we adopted through a reputable agency. But the agency's records were falsified. Janet's father had a contact who helped him create a fake identity for his daughter in case his operation was ever busted. Derrick stepped closer to Sheila, to Janet. Harriet recognized you the moment she saw you at the hotel. She knew who you were. She called you Janet because she remembered the girl who used to watch her get beaten while eating the food Harriet's hands had harvested. Janet backed away, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She looked at Richard, then at Evelyn, but both of them were staring at her with expressions of absolute horror and disgust. You monster, Evelyn whispered, her tears finally turning into a cold, burning rage. We gave you everything. We loved you like our own daughter. And you kept our real daughter in the dark, letting her believe she was a curse, letting her work herself to death. I did what I had to do to survive. Janet spat, her sweet, fragile persona evaporating instantly, replaced by a sharp, venomous sneer. Do you think I wanted to go back to that filthy basement? Do you think I wanted to be a trafficker's daughter forever? You Lawson people are so easy to fool. A few tears, a little sweet talk, and you were ready to believe anything. You wanted a perfect, cultured daughter, so I gave you one. She let out a harsh, mocking laugh, her eyes darting to Derrick. And you, Derrick. You're the biggest fool of all. You faked being a cripple for 3 years just to please me. You let your own sister starve while you played your pathetic little game. You killed her just as much as I did. Derrick didn't flinch. The words didn't hurt him because they were true. He was a fool. A monstrous, arrogant fool. Detective Harris, Derrick said quietly. Take her away. The arrest of Janet, the girl who had masqueraded as Sheila Lawson for nearly a decade, sent shockwaves through the city's high society. But the real scandal, the one that the Lawson family's lawyers could not suppress, was the revelation of the 3-year test. A prominent local journalist, tipped off by an anonymous source within the police department, published a scathing exposé detailing the entire sordid affair. The headline read, "The $1 Million Lie, How a Wealthy Family Tortured Their Biological Daughter to Test Her Character." The article detailed everything, the fake deaths of Richard and Evelyn, Derrick's simulated ALS, the 4 jobs Harriet had worked, and the tragic reality of her terminal illness. The public reaction was immediate and ferocious. The Lawson Group's stock prices plummeted overnight. Board members demanded Richard's immediate resignation. Protesters gathered outside the family's luxury estate, carrying signs with Harriet's name and photos of the dilapidated apartment where she had lived. But inside the Lawson mansion, the silence was deafening. Richard sat in his study, the lights turned off, staring at the empty desk. The phone had been ringing nonstop for 12 hours, but he had unplugged it. The door opened, and Evelyn walked in. She looked 20 years older, her hair unkempt, her eyes hollowed out by endless weeping. Richard, she whispered. The hospital called. Richard didn't move. What did they say? They said, her organ function is continuing to decline. The ventilator is the only thing keeping her body warm. They want us to come in. To make a decision. Richard closed his eyes, a single tear escaping his lashes and rolling down his lined cheek. A decision. The decision to pull the plug. To officially end the life of the daughter they had spent 10 years searching for, only to destroy her. In 3. Where is Derrick? Richard asked, his voice barely audible. He hasn't left her bedside since yesterday, Evelyn said, her voice cracking. He won't eat. He won't sleep. He just sits there, holding her hand. We need to go, Richard said, standing up slowly. His joints popped, his body feeling heavy and fragile. We need to see her. One last time. The ICU room was quiet, save for the rhythmic, mechanical whoosh of the ventilator and the soft, steady beep of the cardiac monitor. Harriet lay beneath the white hospital sheets, looking tiny and fragile against the sterile backdrop. Her head was wrapped in clean, white bandages, covering The wound on her temple. Her face had been cleaned of blood, but the severe bruising remained, a stark, painful contrast to her pale skin. Derrick sat in a plastic chair beside the bed. His hand was wrapped around hers. Her fingers were cold, limp, and entirely unresponsive. "Harriet," he whispered, his voice dry and cracked. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He had repeated those words thousands of times over the past 48 hours. Hoping, praying against all medical reality, that some part of her could hear him. But there was no response. The monitor continued its steady, uncaring rhythm. The door opened, and Richard and Evelyn entered the room. They moved slowly, as if entering a sacred, terrible place. Evelyn walked to the other side of the bed and fell to her knees, grabbing Harriet's other hand. She pressed it to her cheek, her body shaking with silent, desperate sobs. "My baby," Evelyn cried, her voice a broken whisper. "My beautiful, sweet girl. What did we do to you? How could we have been so blind?" Richard stood at the foot of the bed, his hands gripping the metal railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw the thinness of her wrists. He saw the faint, yellow tint of her skin, a sign of her failing liver. He saw the small scar on her collarbone, a remnant of a childhood injury she had suffered before she was taken. "I thought I was protecting us," Richard whispered, his voice cracking. "I thought I was being a good father." "You weren't a father, Richard," Derrick said, his voice flat, his eyes never leaving Harriet's face. "You were a judge. And you sentenced her to death before she even had a chance to speak." "Derrick, please," Evelyn sobbed. "Don't say that." "It's the truth, Mom," Derrick said. "We all did it. We all watched her walk into this room, and we all decided she had to prove she was worthy of our love. But she didn't have to prove anything. She was our sister. She was your daughter. And we killed her." At that moment, the door to the room opened, and Dr. Chen, the chief neurologist, walked in. He looked at the family, his expression a mixture of professional solemnity and profound regret. "Mr. and Mrs. Lawson," Dr. Chen said gently. "We have completed the final round of neurological testing. The results are unchanged. There is zero electrical activity in her brain. The brainstem reflexes are absent." He paused, letting the heavy words settle in the room. "She is clinically dead. The ventilator is only oxygenating her organs, but there is no hope of recovery. We need to discuss the discontinuation of life support." Evelyn let out a loud, heartbroken wail, burying her face in the hospital sheets. Richard closed his eyes, his head bowing as if accepting a final crushing blow. Is there really nothing we can do?" Richard asked, his voice trembling. "We have money. We can fly in specialists from anywhere in the world. We can pay for any treatment." "Mr. Lawson," Dr. Chen interrupted, his voice firm but compassionate. "Money cannot bring back a dead brain. Her body is rapidly failing. Even with the ventilator, her blood pressure is dropping, and her kidneys have completely shut down. Keeping her on these machines is only prolonging her physical degradation. It is time to let her go." Derrick looked at Harriet's pale face. He remembered the last notes she had written on her phone. "The system says the commission is almost complete. Just a little longer. I can go home soon." He didn't understand what the system meant, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This family, this wealthy, beautiful, monstrous family, had never been her home. "Do it," Derrick whispered. "Derrick." Evelyn gasped, looking up with red, horrified eyes. "Mom, let her go," Derrick said, his tears finally flowing freely down his cheeks. "She's been working for 3 years without a single day of rest. She's been carrying the weight of our deaths and my sickness every single day. Let her rest. Please." Richard looked at his son, then at his wife, and finally at the dying girl on the bed. He felt a sudden, crushing wave of clarity. Derrick was right. The greatest mercy they could offer her now was to stop torturing her body. "Yes," Richard said, his voice shaking but resolute. "Discontinue the life support." The room was prepared. The doctors adjusted the monitors, silencing the alarms, so the family wouldn't have to hear the final, erratic rhythms of her heart. Evelyn clung to Harriet's hand, her tears wetting the sterile sheets. Richard stood beside his wife, his hand resting on her trembling shoulder. Derrick remained in his chair, his gaze locked onto Harriet's face. He wanted to remember every line, every detail, so he could carry the guilt of his actions for the rest of his life. Dr. Chen stepped forward and reached for the switch on the ventilator. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. Richard nodded slowly. With a soft, metallic click, the machine was turned off. The rhythmic, mechanical whoosh stopped. The room fell into a sudden, heavy silence, broken only by the soft, shallow gasps of Harriet's body attempting to breathe on its own. Derrick held his breath, watching her chest rise and fall once, twice, and then nothing. The cardiac monitor showed her heart rate beginning to drop. 80. 60. 45. At that moment, a strange phenomenon occurred. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the ICU room seemed to flicker, dropping in intensity until the room was bathed in a soft, ethereal golden glow. Derrick blinked, wondering if his sleep-deprived mind was hallucinating. But he saw Richard and Evelyn looking around in confusion as well. Suddenly, a soft, mechanical sound, like the chime of a silver bell, echoed through the quiet room. It didn't come from any of the medical equipment. It seemed to resonate directly within their minds. The Obsession Commission has been successfully closed. Host Harriet has returned to her original world. System departure initiated. Derrick's breath caught in his throat. The system. The words from her note. He looked down at Harriet's body. A faint, luminescent light began to rise from her chest, gathering into a soft, glowing orb of pure white. Within the light, Derrick could see faint, swirling memories, not of her painful 3 years in the city, but of a different place. He saw a girl with Harriet's face, laughing under a brilliant blue sky, running through a field of wild lilies, her hand held by a warm, smiling woman who looked nothing like Evelyn Lawson. He saw a place of peace, of warmth, of laughter, completely free from the cold, calculating cruelty of the Lawson family. Host's final message to the world of origin: the debt is paid. The illusion is shattered. Do not look for me, for I have finally found my home. The golden light flared gently, filling the room with a warm, comforting fragrance of lilies and fresh rain, and then, with a soft, silent pop, it vanished. The cardiac monitor let out a single, continuous tone. 0. The physical body of Harriet Lawson lay still, her expression peaceful, her lips slightly curved into a faint, relaxed smile. She was gone. Not just dead, but entirely gone, having returned to a place where no one would ever demand she prove her right to be loved. The funeral of Harriet Lawson was a quiet, private affair, held at a small cemetery on the outskirts of the city. There were no wealthy associates, no high society friends, and no reporters. Only Richard, Evelyn, and Derrick stood before the simple, gray headstone. The inscription read: Harriet Lawson 2004 to 2024. She worked, she suffered, and she finally went home. Richard stood in the cold wind, his black coat wrapped tightly around him. He looked at the headstone, feeling a profound, empty void where his ambition and pride had once lived. The Lawson Group had been forced into restructuring. Richard had lost his position as chairman, and their family wealth had been severely diminished by legal fees, settlements, and the collapse of their stock. But he didn't care. The money felt like paper, useless and cold. Evelyn was in a private psychiatric facility, unable to cope with the crushing weight of her guilt. She spent her days sitting by the window, folding small paper lilies and asking the nurses if her daughter had come home yet. Derrick stood a few feet back, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He looked at the simple headstone, knowing that the girl who lay beneath it was only an empty shell. The real Harriet, the soul that had endured his cruelty, was far away, safe and happy in a world he could never reach. Derrick, Richard said, his voice old and tired. We should go. You go, Richard, Derrick said quietly. I want to stay a little longer. Richard looked at his son, seeing the cold, unyielding wall that had grown between them. He nodded slowly, turned, and walked back to the waiting car. Derrick walked up to the grave and knelt down. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, leather-bound notebook he had found in the apartment. He placed it on the fresh earth beside a small bouquet of white lilies. I will never forget, Derrick whispered, his voice cracking. I will spend the rest of my life remembering what we did to you. And I will never, ever forgive myself. He stood up, turned his back on the cemetery, and walked into the cold, gray afternoon. 2 months later. The courtroom was packed with journalists and curious onlookers. The trial of Janet, the girl who had lived as Sheila Lawson, had become the most talked about legal event of the decade. Janet sat at the defense table, dressed in a simple, gray prison jumpsuit. Her long, beautiful hair had been cut short, and her face was devoid of makeup, revealing the sharp, hard lines of her true character. Her defense attorney tried to argue that she had been a victim of her father's brainwashing, that she had been forced to adopt the identity of Sheila to escape a life of abuse. But the prosecution was relentless. They presented the evidence of her faked kidnapping, the testimonies of her gang-affiliated accomplices, and the financial records showing how she had manipulated the Lawson family into spending millions of dollars on her luxury lifestyle while their biological daughter was starving. When it was time for Janet to take the stand, she didn't show any remorse. She looked at the crowded courtroom, her eyes flashing with a cold, defiant light. Do you regret what you did to Harriet Lawson? The prosecutor asked, pointing a finger at her. Janet let out a dry, mocking laugh. Regret? Why should I? Harriet was a weak, pathetic fool. She had the Lawson blood, but she lived like a dog because she believed in things like family and duty. I didn't kill her. Her own family did. I just gave them what they wanted, a perfect, pretty daughter they could show off to their rich friends. If they had spent 5 minutes looking at their real daughter instead of testing her, they would have known. But they didn't. They chose to believe me because I looked like what they wanted. She turned her gaze to the gallery, where Derrick sat in the front row, his face expressionless. You Lawson people are the real monsters, Janet sneered, her voice echoing through the courtroom. You think your money makes you gods. You think you can play with people's lives and then buy your way out of the guilt. Well, you can't. You're going to live with what you did to Harriet for the rest of your miserable lives, and I hope it burns you to the ground. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but the damage was done. The courtroom was filled with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Janet was found guilty on all counts, including identity theft, fraud, conspiracy, and extortion. She was sentenced to 20 years in a maximum security prison without the possibility of parole. As she was led away in handcuffs, she didn't look back. She had lost her game. But she knew she had left a permanent, uncurable poison in the hearts of her captors. Winter had returned to the city. The streets were covered in a thin layer of dirty snow, the wind whipping through the concrete canyons with a cold, biting fury. Derrick rode his scooter through the heavy traffic, his face protected by a plastic helmet, a large, insulated delivery bag strapped to his back. He had sold his luxury car, his designer clothes, and his share of the Lawson estate. He had moved into room 302, the same tiny, cold apartment where Harriet had lived. He worked the same 4 jobs she had worked. He ate the same cheap bread. He felt the cold, biting wind against his skin, and he welcomed the pain. It was the only thing that made him feel alive, the only thing that connected him to the sister he had destroyed. He pulled up outside a large, flashing office building in the downtown district. He took the delivery bag, walked inside, and took the elevator to the 15th floor. He delivered the food to a young, busy office worker, who handed him a small tip without even looking at his face. Thank you, Derrick said, his voice quiet and polite. He walked out of the office and stood by the large window overlooking the city. Below him, the tiny, ant-like figures of people hurried through the snow, each carrying their own burdens, their own secrets, their own quiet tragedies. He looked up at the gray, overcast sky. A single, white snowflake landed on the glass, melting into a tiny, clear droplet of water. Derrick smiled, a small, bitter, but peaceful smile. He had completed his delivery. He had earned his bread. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt a faint, distant whisper of hope. Not for forgiveness. He knew he didn't deserve that. But for the first time, he understood what Harriet had felt when she looked at the sky. She hadn't been working to survive. She had been working to go home. And now, she was finally there.